am Garrett. I am the host of this series. Thanks again to Light Panels for putting this on. Today is also cool because not only are we doing the One Light Challenge, but we are also going to be giving away one by one Gemini Hard. It is one of the coolest fixtures that I have ever used, and the winner will be selected by Light Panels and will be announced at the end of the stream. You do have to be online in order to be a winner. So if you are here for that, stick around to the end, because that is when we're going to be announcing which of you lucky people are going to be getting a one by one Gemini Hard. If you have not tuned in to this series before, or you've seen some of it, but not all of it, every episode that we have done thus far is going to be on Light Panel's website as well as their YouTube channel. So if you want to ping any of the other topics that we have discussed, you can find all of that there. I'm starting to see people tuning in from all over the place here. We got some Oklahoma. It's cool. We got Seattle, Saskatchewan. We got all sorts of folks in here. So, as always, if you have any questions throughout the duration of this, there's two ways you can do it. You can toss it into the chat. May or may not see it there. There is also a Q&A module. So if you have a question, that's going to be the easiest place to pop in. I am going to be checking it throughout the live stream. So then as I see questions come up, I'll answer those. And if we have time at the end, we will also have an open Q&A for any questions that you guys might have. So before we dive in, the One Light Challenge, this is a thing that a lot of owner-operators, a lot of indie filmmakers, a lot of people who are starting out in a freelance or solo career find themselves in, which is where we have the budget for one light fixture, and we still need to film a variety of things, even though we don't necessarily have an entire light kit. So how do we light professionally when we only have one light available to us? Okay, so that's what we're doing. And today is interesting because what we've done is we have filmed three completely different things. We've done a product spot, we have done a docu-interview setup, and we have done a narrative creative setup, all using one fixture, which is the one by one Gemini Hard. On top of that, I filmed all of it by myself, and I filmed all three in one day. So everything we're going to be talking about today is going to be approachable, is going to be manageable, and is going to be something that you can do even if you are working alone. All right. One technical snafu that I have run into today is that for some reason I don't have audio on the video feed. So we're going to be looking at the video, but there won't be audio to accompany it. If you want to see the pieces that we're looking at today with sound, the easiest way to do that is going to be to follow me on Instagram. That is at Garrett Sammons. I'll be posting all three of these today, along with some of the breakdown stuff. So that way you guys can kind of see these, what they look like with the audio that accompanies it. So today we're going to be looking at them on mute. But again, the video is the important thing because that is going to be looking at the lighting that we are addressing. Okay. So there we go. We've got Great Manchester, we got Hamburg, got New Orleans, we got folks, we got London, we got people from everywhere. I'm so excited that you guys are here. So stick around to the end. We are going to be doing the one by one giveaway. And then again, we've gone over a lot of stuff. So if you haven't yet seen all of the different scenarios that we've done lighting tutorials on, that's going to be on Light Panel's YouTube channel. So without further ado, the first piece that we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at a product spot. So when we're shooting commercial work, when we're shooting specifically small or product style stuff in a studio environment, we have to approach everything differently. Because when our subject changes scale and size, of course, the relative surface area of the lights that we are using change accordingly. This is why people who do like claymation stuff and like small miniature things, they have an entire different skill set when it comes to lighting, because you have to scale according to your subject. Which is good for us, because if we have one fixture to use and we have a small subject to work with, that gives us a lot of latitude in how we can utilize a light fixture. One of the things that we've talked about a lot in this series is buying the brightest, most accurate light your budget can afford, because anytime we modify that light, we're either losing the spread of that light or the intensity of that light. The nice thing with the 1x1 Gemini Hard is that it is 5 times brighter than the 1x1 Gemini Soft, meaning that I can modify it pretty much however I want, and I'm still going to be able to have plenty of light to work with. The camera we're using for this series, or for the videos that we're looking at today, is a red Komodo. And if you guys have ever shot with reds, you'll know that they are not exactly low light monsters in the way that Sony is. They're reds, they're pretty hungry. So if I can shoot and get good exposure with a red camera, for those of you who are shooting with mirrorless stuff, whether it's Canon C70s, any of the Alpha series from Sony's, any of that stuff, it's going to be a breeze. It'll be a dream for you. So without further ado, we're going to look at this 15-second spot. We'll probably look at it 2 or 3 times throughout the course of this because it is, again, a teaser promo spot that's about 15 seconds long. Okay, so without further ado, here is the spot. Two things to note as we get into this. Everything that you saw there was shot practically. There is no post effects done to it. There are no after effects done to that. That is exactly the composite as it was created. And we did that again using one fixture. And you can see this here. So here's our basic setup. We have a studio. We put a duvetine over a table to have it black. We had a black curtain backdrop, and overhead we had our 1x1 Gemini Hard with a very tight honeycomb grid on it. Once we turn the lights on and the house lights off, you can see this is the general setup that we have. Anytime that you're shooting black on black on black on black, having separation is super important. You can see that light shift there. That is because we can use fill or bounce as fill. So even if we're just using one single fixture, in this case, as you can see right there, there's our Gemini 1x1 Hard. Using simple and easy tools and modifiers like fill or negatives allow us to get the exact looks that we want, right? And to get this flyover look that we're doing there, the way that we have that is because it's on the C-stand and that C-stand comes up and over, you can loosen just that tight, that last knob at the top, and that allows you to kind of swing your C-stand arm out. Something to note, if you're going to do that, absolutely make sure that your stand is bagged down very well and make sure that somebody is there holding the stand. The last thing you want to do is start swinging a fixture around on a C-stand and either clock someone in the head, or if it loses balance, it falls over. That's a bad time. So the first thing you want to do is to make sure that if you are going to do that and you're going to fly it up and over, that you have your stand fully weighted down. And of course, then you have somebody to man that, so it's not just freewheeling all around. So half of those shots are shot with that C-stand in mind. And if we do a little breakdown here, you can see here, if I come here, let me get some focus here. Hello. There we go. Okay. You can see here, we have our table set up like this. We have our product here. Camera is set up like this, right? Over on the corner here, this is where I have my C-stand set up with an arm that swings out up and over the top of my product. And then I can sit here and I can rotate this out either direction, and it's going to give me that flyover movement, right? Anytime that we're shooting product work, one of 3 things has to happen. We have to have product movement, we have to have camera movement, or we have to have product interaction. If we don't have at least one of those 3 in any of our shots, it's going to create something that's visually very boring, right? So we have product movement, camera movement, or product interaction. So when we do lighting effects that are on our product, that looks and counts as product interaction, because even though something's not physically grabbing the product, we are seeing some dimensional shift and movement around the product. Okay, so if you want to have your product work look visually interesting, at least one of those 3, preferably 2 or 3 of those things, and it's going to help make everything much more visually interesting. So first trick, we have our physical light movement that then gives us that visual dimension that's around our product. The next piece that we did is we actually locked off the light entirely directly overhead. And then what we did is, because the Gemini 1x1 well, all of the Geminis have effects built in, we could use an effect that's called paparazzi. There's all sorts of effects that you can do, and you can apply all sorts of colors to those effects. They're incredibly customizable. But the paparazzi effect really gives us a sense of like a flash bulb, where it immediately is hot and then it has a little bit of taper off where it really kind of slows down and fades out. And that was the look that I wanted it to go for, because we have this very fast cut movement intercut with this very kind of slow sweeping light effects. And the combination of having a slow sweeping light effect and a fast strobe action with the paparazzi effect gives us a lot of flexibility in how we cut and how we edit to make our final ad look and feel the way that it looks. And the music is a very percussive track, so you can imagine drums and things driving a lot of the edit forward. But that's it. It's one light overhead that either is swinging on an arm or is locked off with the paparazzi effect. I then take a bounce card, and you can get them at any sort of like craft store, like Michael's or Joann's if you're in the US. And it's just a little foam board. You can get it in like a 1x2, 2x3, 4x8. There's all sorts of size, but it's just a little white foam board piece, and it allows you to bounce light that's existing from a fixture into your environment. So for some of the shots where I needed to illuminate a little bit more of the product, because again, we're shooting a black product on a black background with a black table, I need to add light in very strategic places to separate that foreground from that background. But this whole setup took probably 15 minutes to set up, and then I was off and shooting with a combination of macro lenses and some wider lenses to get the really, really close stuff and the really far away pieces. So we're going to watch it again. That way you can kind of see it in all of its practicality, but be looking for those two different types of lighting effects. Know that there are no post effects done on this. It is just a straight linear edit. So with that said, we will watch this one more time, and then we will go to our second setup. There's that. Again, any questions at all throughout the course of this thing, toss those into the Q&A module, and I will be more than happy to kind of dive into the specifics of those. But two simple effects, one simple light setup, and then, of course, you know, we add a little bit of set design with that gold fabric that we put at the end. But by and large, that's as difficult, or as simple rather, as it needs to be. It doesn't need to be difficult. You don't have to over-engineer or overthink it. If you have a light that is powerful enough to give you the exposure values that you want, and of course, you have the effects built in, the possibilities are endless. I shot this entirely alone, and it still turned out, I think, pretty cool. It's cooler with sound, so make sure you follow me on Instagram for that. Mike asks, do you do anything to shape the light beam? Yes. So on this, we used a honeycomb grid. So there are a whole host of modifiers, on-light modifiers, that you can get for this light, which are awesome. And that includes, I'm going to pull up an image of it real quick here if I can get to it. Pause right at the right moment here. So if we go back over here, there's the overhead light. You can see it there. That's the 1x1 hard overhead. And then if I'll pause on this next shot here, right there, that is a honeycomb grid. It's a very, very tight beam angle egg crate, essentially, but instead of fabric, it's made out of metal. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's about a 40-degree grid on that. So really, really tight, really, really narrow. And then that's what allows me to keep a very, very narrow beam angle. So as I'm doing the pass over my product, I'm not getting a whole lot of spill and wash on either end. It's a pretty linear beam. Great question. Matthew asks, why use the paparazzi effect rather than effect in post? What are the benefits of doing it in camera? Wouldn't doing it in post give you more control with matching the music? Haha, very good question, Matthew. So two things here. One, when we are talking about the behavior of light, one of the things that we want to do is talk about how it interacts with the products that we're on. If we're doing a straight crossfade in post, right, where we just get constant power is just coming straight down, it's going to dim everything at the exact same weight through the entire dim or fade. When you're doing it practically in camera, different light surfaces refract and reflect light differently. Different textures absorb or reflect light differently. And then, of course, different surface materials. All of those things contribute to how the light behaves and interacts. So by doing it practically, I'm actually getting a much more realistic, because it is real, but a more realistic fade out than I would if I just did something linearly, because the way that the light is interacting with the different surface areas, the different closenesses to and from the camera is all going to be entirely different. There are a lot of different effects in the 1x1 hard that are going to get you similar effects, but the nice thing with the paparazzi is that it is kind of this kind of flash bulb effect, which I really, really, really like. So there we go. That's that there. What was the intensity of the light? Another great question. So when you are modifying a light, especially as heavy as we were modifying that fixture with that really, really tight grid, it eats a ton of your output. So I think for that, we actually, because we were shooting everything at about 2 to 2.8, depending on the lens we were using. I say we, I'm used to people being on set with me. I, by myself, was using, but I believe that we had that fixture at about 70%. So we didn't even have it all the way up. We had it at about 70% because it is such an intensely bright light that even with as heavy of a modifier as that was, I still had latitude after the fact. Okay. Any more questions, feel free to pop those in. The next one that I'm going to talk about is something entirely different and something that you guys are probably a little bit more familiar with doing if you are solo owner operator, independent and freelance filmmaker where you're doing a lot of corporate work. There's a huge overview in corporate work and in documentary work. We have done an episode on how to shoot interview lighting. That was with a full crew and that was with a full kit. A lot of you are going to be doing corporate work where it's talking head, A-roll, B-roll, docu-style stuff, or documentary work with very small crews or by yourself. So I wanted to revisit how we film interviews in a way where the lighting is interesting, where it looks right, it looks the way that it should, and it is of a caliber that people are going to be willing to pay for, but scaled way back on a budget. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, yes. So great point. Nestoris, I think that's how I pronounce your name. I apologize if it's not. The other thing when it comes to the syncing of the music for that Dolby piece that we shot, the headphones, the other thing that I did is I actually doubled the frame rate. So we were actually shooting that, or almost doubled. We were shooting that at 40. And the reason why I doubled my frame rate is so then that way I could speed ramp that or speed it up or slow it down however I needed to then, of course, match the music that I was going with. So the only thing that I did in post was either over crank or under crank my footage to then, of course, match the speed of that edit. It is much easier and it is much more efficient to speed footage up than it is to try to slow footage down. You can interpolate footage and make slower motion footage out of non-slow motion footage, but with varying degrees of success. By filming it at a slower or more frames to make it slower in a 24, 25 frame timeline, I then can speed that back up, or I can leave it slow depending on how I'd want. And I know that the way that it's going to play back in the edit is going to be fluid and nice and smooth. So yes, very, very, very good point. Going back to number 2 here. When we're filming documentary or corporate work, before we even light the thing, we need to think about where we're setting our interviews up, where these things are happening. And we talked about this in the episode about interviews, but the place that you are interviewing someone should reflect the subject matter that you are discussing with them. And from a cinematography standpoint, the larger the space that you can be in, the more visually appealing our compositions can be. A lot of times, especially for folks who are just starting out, they will work with a client. The client will be like, well, we freed up our conference room for you, right? And then you find out that you're in a semi-small room and there's a massive table in the middle of it. And there's not really a whole lot of room for the camera to be, for the person to be, for the light to be. And you get these really cramped compositions. One thing that I suggest everybody do is that you request a walkthrough or a location scout with the client long beforehand, not on the day, but beforehand. And you walk through the space with them and you find very cool, very large spaces that you can film in, and tell the client, hey, if we want this to look as good as you want it to, this should be the place that we film it. The larger the space, the more aesthetically pleasing our compositions can be. So that's step one. Now, with that said, we've talked about 3-point lighting. We've talked about kind of setting that up and contrast from one side of the face to the other. These are all topics that we've discussed in this series, so I'm not going to get too far into that. But when it comes to using one fixture, if we're only going to use one light and we're going to set up an interview with that light, two things need to be considered. How are we going to separate our foreground from our background, right? Large spaces very much help with this because, of course, if we can have a shallow depth of field, it's going to act as a separator, but also think about it in terms of our light values. How bright is the environment? How dark is our foreground? How bright is our foreground? How dark is our background environment? And you making sure that those complement one another and our subject isn't then falling into the background visually is going to be step number one in being able to use one fixture for our interview setup. The other thing that we talked about is the surface area of our light. The larger a surface area is relative to our subject, the softer that light is going to behave. So when we're using one fixture, rarely, if ever, would you want to use one fixture pointed directly at your subject. You really want that to be pulled off and bounced off of something much larger, because that is going to give you a lot more wrap around your subject's face. Before we get any further, let me show you what I'm talking about. Pay attention to the location, right, where this interview is taking place, and then pay attention to the softness of the light of our subject. They're important. We're going to keep talking about those. I want you to feel as though the story I'm telling you is important, that there is some deep meaning behind what I say. There isn't, but the ambient tones and drones of the music mixed with a soft but contrasting lighting style contribute to the idea that this has impact. The only thing that could be more impactful is if I end this with some ambiguous phrase. And this is my story. See, it's just that easy. Okay, so we're filming this in a long corridor, a long hallway, right? That allows me not only to have really nice leading lines, but it also allows me to separate my foreground from my background, because the back wall is, 40 yards behind me. So being in a place that is going to give you that separation negates the need for a hair light, right? We don't need a light fixture coming from behind to then separate our backgrounds and our foregrounds, because we can do that within the visual space. So if you're working with one fixture, again, keeping those principles in mind of 3-point lighting, if we don't have a hair light, we need separation, because all a hair light is going to do for us is to create that visual separation. Okay, that's one. Now, you notice that the light on my face is really soft. It's direct, right? It feels very directional, but it's not casting harsh or gross shadows. And that is because if we come over here, one of the things that I recommend for most filmmakers when they are working is I find a wall and ceiling joint. And if you push that up into the corner, it's going to give you much more wrap than a fixture would on its own. Now, if I pause here real quick, there you go. This is the fixture pointed at the seam where the ceiling and the wall meet. The wall is white, the ceiling is white. But if you look right here at the back, I have it at 100%. Because we're going to be bouncing this. But if you look at our CCT value, the Kelvin is set to 3580 with 1 tick in our green tint. This is important. A lot of times when you are filming corporate work, you are going to be in an environment that you do not have total control over. And if it's in an office building like that was, a lot of the time, the light is going to be gross and fluorescent. It's green. Fluorescent light is green, and it's terrible, right? But if I can get a color meter read and I can see what the color temperature of the light in the room is, I can then dial that perfectly in to my Gemini. And so then the light that is coming out of that light is going to match the light that's in the environment, which means we're skipping ahead there, which means I then can white balance to that color and my skin tones are going to look nice. You can see just how gross and green that hallway is. Another tip and trick, see that little C-stand arm that's kicking in that monitor right there? Anytime you're filming alone and you need to check your focus and you need to do all of that, I swing out an arm where the face would be, and then that gives me the option to pull focus. Now, this is the other important piece here. Boom, right there. Even though we're only using one fixture, right? We're only using the 1x1 Gemini hard. I still need to control the light as best I can. So this is a 2x3 solid frame, also known as a neg or negative. And I have set this up directly over my head in this hallway. There was one of these fluorescent ballasts, and it was just shining gross light straight down. So I was then able to take a C-stand, throw up and over, and get a flag to block off. Why does it always want to do that? To block off that light. So then you can see here, see how much more dark I am, or the chair is there than the hallway behind it. That is because I was able to block off that light. So using one light pointed away from our subject, bouncing off of the wall and the ceiling, and then having this flag that's blocking the gross light from that fluorescent ballast box really gives me enough control, enough separation, and enough fill and key to make a very, very visually compelling frame like this. See? So we have a high key side, we have a fill side, and we have separation between our foreground and our background. That is with one light. Now, if you find yourself in a position where you do not have a white wall and a white ceiling that you can point the fixture directly into, fear not. This is also where you would use that little foam bounce card. The bigger the bounce card you can use, the better. So if you can get a 2x3, that's awesome. If you can get a 4x8, incredible, right? Whatever you want to do, however you want to use that, but then take that light, point it away from your subject into the bounce board, and use that as the surface area that is going to give you that really soft illumination. Okay, a couple questions here. To get the color temperature correct in the light and the camera, how do you check the color temp? Do you do it by eye, or do you do it by color meter, or by something else? Great question. Never do it by eye. Your eye will lie to you every single time. And the last thing you want, especially in a fluorescent environment, is to not nail your white balance, because then people are just going to look like they got off of a 16-hour boat cruise on a small, tiny dinghy in a tornado. So always use a color meter. A couple options that you can get. The fancy term for a color meter is a spectrometer. So if you've heard of a spectrometer, that's a color meter. The most cost-effective spectrometer that I have found that I use is called a Lumu Power, L-U-M-U Power. I believe it's like $300, and it's both a color meter and a light meter, and it's a little dome that plugs into your phone. I believe it's iOS only. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it is. But for $300 to have a spectrometer and a light meter, that's a great entry option. If you want to go more industry standard, you're going to be using a company called Sekonic, and a spectrometer light meter combo from Sekonic is going to run you probably about $1,600. So Lumu Power is great. It gets you 98% of the way there for next to nothing comparatively. And then, of course, as you work your way up, going with a Sekonic is probably the way to go. Colin asks, what's the diffuser lens on the front of the Gemini? That's great. The 1x1 hard comes with what they call, I believe it's called the dome diffuser, and it just slides right over the front in the same tray that we use for our honeycomb grid, but it is a way to add kind of a bulb or a dome to the front of your fixture. And again, that then further spreads the light. So where we use the honeycomb first, the dome does the opposite, where instead of narrowing our light beam, it expands it. And that modifier does come with the 1x1 Gemini hard, which is awesome that is an included modifier. Russ says, how do you create the fill again? Was there a bounce? Awesome. So Russ, this was a narrow hallway. And so the nice thing with a narrow hallway that we were in is that there's just enough proximity that I'm getting natural bounce off of the wall. Now the one wall, we go over here, there we go. You can see that the wall on camera right is brick, right? Which is not going to bounce light with the same intensity as our key side, which is white. I just simply used that to my advantage. That's why the key is on camera left and the fill is on camera right. But to your point, if you're not in a narrow hallway, absolutely bringing in a small bounce card is going to do more than enough to just fill in those shadows. Because again, purpose of a fill is not to wash out the key. You still want 1 to 2 stops of contrast side to side. But that said, we don't want more than that, especially for most corporate stuff. So bringing in a bounce just as close as you can that's still off camera is going to do more than enough with how bright this fixture is. Scott says, what is my lighting right now? So lighting right now, we've got 2 things going on. I've got a Gemini 1x1, which is directly here set. It's a soft and it's set at like 20%. And then over here on my key side, I have 2 Quasar Science tubes, the LED tube lights. These are the crossfades, which are just or crossfades, which are bicolor LED tubes. And I did that just because this is a very small room that I'm in, like that's the wall right there. And so this is going to give me more wrap for this wall than just having a single picture. So Gemini 1x1 soft and 2 Quasar tubes, all dimmed down pretty far. But that's mine there. Is that 100% light intensity, and how is the heating, fan, noise, etc.? Great question. Yes, it is active cooled, so there is a fan on all of the Gemini products, and I believe the Astra products as well. That said, I have never once heard it. The other nice thing about the way that those fixtures are engineered is the entire back panel, or the back side of the panel, it acts as a heat sink, right? So there's a lot of passive cooling that's happening that the fan is then assisting with, but never once have I ever heard the fan in anything, even in a dead silent room that we're getting audio in. So active cooled, which is great. I've never once had one of these lights overheat in a variety of places that I'm in, and I've never heard them. So they're awesome in that way. Okay. So Jeff said, tried to order Lumu, waited 3 months, finally got a refund. Not sure if they're still in business, but go on to eBay. It's a wonderful piece of kit. I was just on their website the other day, and I do know that they have like a new generation of it, like the Lumu Power 2 or whatever, that you can buy directly through them. It's not an Indiegogo or a Kickstarter anymore. Like you can buy it retail from them. Can you talk us through the different color temperatures that reflect off of bounces depending on the material of the bounce? Keith, yes, we have talked about this in one of our past videos. That said, we'll do a quick summation here. Depending on the type of bounce that you use, it is going to affect both your subsurface scattering or refracting, as well as the color temperature itself. This is why having a color meter is so important, because anytime I bounce light off of a surface, it's the wall in that hallway is not pure white, right? The ceiling is not pure white. It is going to be affected by the slight color that's coming off of those, as well as any of the other reflected light in the room. But having a color meter or a spectrometer allows you to get multiple reads throughout a lighting setup to make sure that you can tune and adjust things as needed. So from a process standpoint, take a color read of the natural room that I don't have control over, so I know what the temperature of the room is naturally. That is then what I tune the light to. The light then is going to be blasting out the same color light that we're already getting in the room, which is going to get us pretty close because all of that light is already reflecting off of the walls and the ceiling. But once I then have all of my lighting set up, I take another read with the color meter, and whatever that read is what I then put into the camera, because that is what's going to give me the closest to my skin tones here. Sekonic C800 is worth its weight in gold. Any Sekonic product, right? They have entry-level products all the way to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 products. Their entire line of products, it's industry standard for a reason. They're all incredible. So you're not going to go wrong with that brand. William, the camera I'm using right now, this is a Panasonic GH5S, and the overhead is like a G9, I believe. But both little Panasonic cameras that work great for this environment. Okay, we're going to move on to number 3 now. Keep the questions coming. I love them. But now that we have done a product spot and we have done a commercial spot or a corporate spot, right? Docu-style interview piece, I want to show a narrative or a creative piece, right? How we can use one fixture creatively for a short sequence as well. But let's take a look at this third piece and then we'll break it down. Very compelling movie, yes. So let's break this down. Again, one fixture. This is using the 1x1 Gemini hard. And at this point, I didn't use any modifier on the light. In fact, you can see here, all of the shape that we were getting from this is coming from that slit in the doorway. That's what's shaping our light, which is awesome. So just outside the window, all the way up to the ceiling, you can see the ballast behind it, but we use the 1x1 Gemini. Again, crank that sucker to 100% because I wanted all of the shadows to fall into nothing. So a super bright light contrasted by a super dark room then needs to use this bounce. That bounce we've already talked about. That is that 4x8 bounce that we're using. Okay, so one light out the window. Using that window the way that we did almost acted like a cookie. If you've heard the term cookie before, cookie is a piece that we put in front of a fixture but before our subject, and we use that to shape our light. A lot of these are going to be manufactured, so I know that a lot of gaffers will cut them out of cardboard and stuff and just kind of get the shape that they want, place it where they want. You can also buy pre-made cookies. Cookies are different than gobos. Gobos are used with Fresnel style fixtures. Cookies are used for kind of like everything else. But our window acted as a cookie. So if we come here, here we go. We have, this is that same hallway that we had that we were working with. There's this little inlet here. This is the door, right? So the door exists here. We put our 1x1 Gemini here, which then kind of works through the little slit in the door right here. So then there is this hallway that the rest of this is in. So I was sitting here, camera was kind of here, like so. And then this cookie is kind of creating that line and that separation there. Okay, so that's all of that. Then for some of the close shots, we would bring in that bounce card. Again, I wanted the high contrast. You can play a lot more in the world of contrast for narrative and creative projects than you can for like documentary corporate stuff. So with that, I don't mind if things are falling off into the nothingness. I'm totally cool with that. But for things like close-ups, we really want to make sure that we are bringing that fill back in, because anytime an audience is watching a project, they're looking for two things. First thing they look for are eyeballs. And the second thing that they are looking for is for the movement of the mouth, or to read lips. So as long as our exposure is right on the face, the rest of the image doesn't matter. And that's it. One light in a hallway, didn't change anything, didn't move anything. The only thing is on the close-up shots, we brought in a bounce. So another very simple, very easy setup. Again, we shot all of that on a red. Reds are light hungry cameras. If you're using a mirrorless camera, especially like a Sony, I mean, you're never going to need the Gemini 1x1 hard to be at 100% because those cameras are so ISO friendly. So quick summation of that: 3 projects: product spot with the headphones, interview spot for documentary corporate work in the hallway, and then this narrative creative spot. All 3 of those do have sound. I will put all 3 of those on my Instagram today. Last couple questions here. We have Nico says, is it an option to use the corridor light as a backlight and place the subject in front of this light? Yes and no. Yes, theoretically, we could move me in the hallway to position one of those ballasts to kind of just catch behind me and act as a hair light or a backlight. Absolutely could do that. The other thing when we're talking about fluorescence that is important to keep in mind is the fact that a fluorescent light, unless it is a filmmaking tuned fluorescent bulb, has an inherent flicker. So that light naturally is going to have a slight strobing effect that more often than not is going to appear on camera as a band of a slightly darker color. And that band will go across the screen and it'll kind of like slowly work its way down, and it'll just kind of repeat over and over and over. Banding is the nemesis of all CMOS chip cameras, which all of your mirrorless DSLR cameras all are. One of the nice things with the Red Komodo is it's a global shutter as opposed to a rolling shutter, so there is no banding in the same way. But if you do pay attention to it, you'll notice that the background light is somewhat inconsistent. So if we lean on that light to act as one of our lights, it's actually going to bring more attention to the fact that we're getting that banding or that strobing effect with those lights than if we tried to ignore them altogether and again light our subject in a way that's pleasing. Because if our subject is lit correctly, nobody's going to care about the background, right? Nobody's going to watch it and be like, it's cool, but like, was the background like changing by about a quarter stop up and down? Nobody's going to notice that. But if it's interfering with our subject, they absolutely will notice that. Matthew says, we're using additional flags or bounces for the narrative piece to do any additional light shaping. Only thing that we did for that is there's the close-up shot where I jump up, where if we come back here, I'll pull it up here so you can see here. So for this, no modifiers. This is just the light that's popping through the window. There's no fill, there's no flag, there's nothing. Nothing here, nothing there as well. Here, boom. Okay, now you can see on the shot, and if you actually look at my eyeball, right? So if I pull like my little cursor here, if you look right there on the side of my eye, you'll see the reflection of that bounce card, right? That's that 4x8 bounce, which is why I'm getting this really nice fill that's coming here and coming down on my neck and on the side of my ear, right? This part of my face is much darker than this part. This is because audiences look for eyeballs. If I didn't throw a fill in on that close-up shot, you would see one eyeball and not the other eyeball. And because I'm not using any other fixtures, I'm not throwing another light up to get a catch light, right? So that's a thing that we would commonly do is you would throw up another fixture pretty far away, but something that you'd still be able to get some reflection in the eye. With one fixture, you don't have that as an option. So by bringing in a bounce is going to act as that. It's going to illuminate the eye. It's going to create that composition that we want. That's the only shot in this entire piece that has any sort of additional modifier, which is just that bounce card that's on the floor. The rest of it is all just with that one light shining straight through that window. The window technically is a modifier because it's working as a cookie, but it's a practical modifier, so I don't count it. Okay, so I have just been told that our winner has been announced, but I've got to I got to go back in here and figure this out. So I will find out who this is. So in the meantime, while I wait to find out who the winner is so I can announce it, any last minute questions that we have? I want to open it up to the floor, whether it's about these 3, whether it's about the Geminis in general, whether it's about lighting things for projects that you have. These are all things that I want to make sure that I am giving you content that you want. Also, by the way, Instagram, I'm super active over there. So if you guys do have questions over there, we can continue this conversation. Just DM me. I'd be more than happy to chat with you guys over there. Scott asks, can Geminis run on batteries? Boy, howdy, can they. Yes, all of the Gemini lights, the 1x1s and the 2x1s, all can run on gold mount or V mount batteries and operate at 100%. Different fixtures have different power requirements. So there are 2 battery plate options that you have for these fixtures. You can get a single battery plate or a double battery plate. If you're doing anything with the 2x1 Geminis, or if you're doing anything with the 1x1 Gemini hard, my suggestion would be the 2 battery plate, because that's going to give you more runtime, because those lights are so powerful. The 1x1 Gemini soft, you can totally rock a single battery plate on that and run any V mount or gold mount battery you want. But yes, fully portable, absolutely can run in the field without the need for mains power, and can operate fully at 100%, which makes them super, super awesome. Joe asks, do you have to buy the grids and modifiers, or do they come with the light? With the 1x1 hard, that dome diffuser that we did for the hallway scene comes with the light. That is the only modifier that ships with the fixture. The rest of the modifiers are going to be independent purchases. So whether you want to get soft boxes, barn doors, let's see here, egg crates, honeycomb grids, any intensifiers. There are a lot of modifiers that you can get for all of the Gemini lights and fixtures, which are awesome. But those are all going to be to scale with what you want to do as separate purchases. Bob asks, what was the lensing for the narrative piece? So all of those were shot with cinemated Leica R lenses, but in terms of focal lengths, the close-up shots on the hands, and the side of the face, those really, really tight ones, that was a 60mm macro. The wide shot was a 24, and then the medium shot was a 50. So it was a 24, a 50, and a 60 macro. That's what we used for that narrative piece. Mike says, do you use the Fresnel type lamps with barn doors, or can you get the effect with the Gemini hard and cookies? Fresnel lights intrinsically have a different light behavior than panel lights. In terms of intensity, I would say that the 1x1 Gemini is hands down the hardest and brightest panel light that I have ever used. But panel lights traditionally are used more for spread, where Fresnel style lights are used more for throw. Different fixture types for different types of things. If you're going to use a Fresnel style lamp with a gobo, or doing something like a Lico or something like that, that's going to be able, I mean, your gobo is going to be that big with your light modifier in it, in some sort of kind of telescoping lens, where with a panel light, a cookie is going to be far better, because that's a little further away, which is going to give you kind of the hard lights that you want. So it depends on the environment that you're in. I use both styles of lights. I would say that the panel lights I use, I don't know, 7 out of every 10 shoots, and my Fresnels are used to supplement my panels. So the Gemini lights are my go-to fixture, even when I'm not shooting stuff for this in my day-to-day work. The panel lights are awesome. They're incredibly versatile. Judson says, do you use the GH5S for your narrative example? Love that camera. I'm shooting a short with it at the moment. The GH5S, even in 2022, is still an unbelievable camera. The images that you can get with this camera are incredible. All 3 of the pieces that you saw today, including this one here, all of these, the product, the narrative, and the corporate, were all shot with the red. So those were all with the red, and those were all with the Leica lenses. But yeah, you could absolutely shoot a short film, and I have shot short films with this camera, and it absolutely rules. Colin, is there a maximum recommended runtime for what? I don't runtime for, you have to give me a clarification on that. Okay, I got time for a couple more, and then we'll kind of announce the winner here. So are the images in post color graded or black leveled, or are camera LUTs used? Great question. So I use a standard Rec 709 LUT for all of my raw footage. So it was all shot in RAW. I then have a Rec 709 LUT that I then use just to get us close. But no, I didn't use any creative LUTs. All of that is going to just be slight tweaking that's done in post. So I would change some of the contrast levels and things like that, but I'm not doing anything crazy color grading. That's far above my pay grade. I hire somebody else to do color grading for me. So nothing in that is that far off from what was shot in camera. Oh, overheating or cooling. So Colin, I have never had any of my panel lights overheat. All of the Geminis and all of the Astras have worked for me for full shoot days, never going down. If you're going to shoot in super cold environments, my suggestion would be to power the light on prior to going into super cold environments. Like I'm talking like, 20 degrees Fahrenheit or sub-zero Celsius. And that just kind of is going to keep the fixture warm enough to run, but I've also never had it shut off due to getting too cold once it's up and running. Okay, so with that said, I think that's it. Gary, what light is on you right now? We talked about this a little earlier. Gemini 1x1 and Quasar tubes to kind of get that light wrap there. Can I add extended batteries to the Gemini lights? Yes, you can get one battery plate, a 2 battery plate, which is hot swappable, or use something like a VCLX if you're using like big, massive batteries. But yes, you absolutely can. So right before I announce the winner that Light Panels has selected for this, I just wanted to say how much fun I have had doing this series with you guys. We're not done. There's going to be more. Don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but we have gone over a lot of different lighting setups. If you missed any of those, do make sure you subscribe to Light Panels YouTube, as well as go onto their website where you can find all of the things that we have done in this series and additional series and things that we have done together over there. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well, where I do how to light breakdowns similar to this, long form type things, as well as gear reviews, camera talk, that kind of stuff over there. And follow me on Instagram if you want to chat and talk and kind of pose more questions over there. That's where you'll find me over there. So with that said, now I'm going to announce the winner. The randomly drawn and selected winner by Light Panels is Miles Smith. Miles Smith, you're going to be getting an email follow-up to get your information from the Light Panels team. So be on the lookout for an email from them, and then you guys can work together and they'll make sure that you get the light. I have nothing to do with that there, but congratulations to Miles. Let's get a round of applause in the chat for Miles. Big W over there. Again, when you buy a modifier or a light, buy the brightest, most accurate light your budget can afford. If a Gemini is not in reach right now, look at the Astra series. The Astra panels are incredibly bright, incredibly accurate lights that are going to get a good starting point for your kit where you can then grow into the Geminis, right? Can't necessarily get a Gemini hard right now. Look at the Gemini soft. It's still an unbelievably incredible fixture. Even if the Astras aren't quite where you're at right now, take a look at the Lycos Plus, which is the kind of, it's about a quarter of an Astra panel. It's a small portable light. There are all sorts of fixtures throughout the entire Light Panels series that is going to get you going in a way that's going to get you bright and accurate lights. Modifying lights are just as important as the fixtures themselves. So don't just buy a fixture, buy modifiers for them, whether it's simple bounce cards, whether it's simple negatives, whether it's off-light fixture modifiers or off-light or on-light modifiers, it doesn't matter, but shaping that light, changing the behavior of that light, getting that light to give us the look and feel that we're going for is what is most important. And that starts with the most accurate and brightest fixtures that you can buy. And for me, I have yet to find anything that can even hold a candle to what the Gemini series can do. Stay in touch. Keep an eye out both on my Instagram, their Instagram, my YouTube, their YouTube. There's going to be more stuff like this, and I want to keep you guys on board with what we're doing here. So big W's for Miles. Have a wonderful holiday season wherever you are in the world. And here is to a fantastic 2023. Thanks, guys.